Should Wisconsin's Chief Justice keep $30,000 in campaign contributions from lawyers with cases pending before the state Supreme Court? Shirley Abrahamson defended those contributions on this program last week, saying they are just a small amount of her overall total fundraising and that they will not influence her decision-making. But her opponent raised the issue again at a debate last week. Jefferson County Circuit Court Judge Randy Koschnick joins us today on UpFront. Judge, it's good to see you again. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me back.
We'll address that issue that you raised again this week in a moment. But first, let me begin with a question I asked the Chief Justice. Tell us about the greatest difference between you and her.
It's our judicial philosophies. I'm a judicial conservative. I believe that justices on Supreme Courts, such as the Wisconsin Supreme Court, should apply the Constitution the way that it's written, and that we should give deference to the legislature when they pass a statute, rather than looking for ways to overturn statutes. Justice Abrahamson is from the other end of the spectrum, and she is an activist justice who frequently votes to overturn statutes passed by our legislature.
She says the term activist is meaningless. It basically means you don't agree with her ruling. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that most people understand what I mean when I say activist. You have the same philosophical divide on the United States Supreme Court and on almost every other state Supreme Court around the country. The United States Supreme Court, for example, you have the strict constructionists like myself, the conservative justices like myself, judicially conservative, not politically conservative.
Do you think the public makes that distinction?
I think so. I think when you explain it to them, when I explain it to them, they seem to understand. I'm not running as a political conservative. I'm a judicial conservative, which means I believe judges should exercise judicial restraint and not legislate from the bench. Leave legislating to the legislature. And on the U.S. Supreme Court, you have John Roberts, Antonin Scalia, Clarence Thomas as the conservatives. You have Ruth Bader Ginsburg and John Paul Stevens as the activists. We have the same breakdown in Wisconsin. Justice Abrahamson is over here with Justice Ginsburg on the left, and I'm over here on the right with Clarence Thomas and Antonin Scalia and John Roberts.
You have called on the Chief Justice to give back $30,000 in campaign contributions from trial attorneys who had cases pending before the Supreme Court, or recuse herself from those cases. She has declined to do that. What do you do about it? Anything?
Well, I can't make her give the money back. It's legal for her to keep the money. There's no question about that. But the Ethics Code does require judges to avoid behaving in a way that creates an appearance of impropriety. So that's a subjective determination under the code that each judge makes. In my opinion, it creates an appearance of impropriety for a judge to keep tens of thousands of dollars in campaign donations from lawyers who have cases pending at that time in front of that judge. So I think that that money ought to be returned, or they should be recused from those cases. I don't know how you can expect her to not create the appearance of impropriety.
Let me be clear. Do you think she's violating the Judicial Code?
No, because it's a subjective determination. Each judge has to decide for himself or herself whether the conduct in question creates an appearance of impropriety. According to some recent polls I've read, one by USA Today, 90% of those surveyed in a nationwide poll believe that judges should not accept money from parties or lawyers who have pending cases. I find myself in that school of thought, that it doesn't look right.
Let me talk for a moment about the issue of your past. You were a public defender, and there are some conservatives, political conservatives, who say they cannot support you because you defended a guy who was convicted of killing a police officer, Ted Oswald. Are you surprised by that? What do you think of it?
Well, the Sixth Amendment under the United States Constitution does require that all defendants in criminal cases have counsel. It's a fundamental right. John Adams, back in colonial days, defended the British soldiers because he believed so strongly in this right to counsel, and the soldiers have been charged with murdering civilians. Abraham Lincoln defended people charged with murder. And so when I was a public defender, I did the cases that were assigned to me. I did them ethically and to the best of my ability, and I'm proud of my work as a public defender. Now, in the Oswald case, the DA in that case, Paul Bucher, who prosecuted the case, wrote me a letter after the trial commending me for my ethics and for following the rules of procedure in court. He supported me when I ran for circuit court judge about 5 years later in 1999, and he is publicly supporting me now in my Supreme Court race. Same is true for the current Waukesha DA, Brad Schimmel, and the current Waukesha Sheriff, Dan Trewicki, as well as many other sheriffs and DAs around the state. So those are isolated criticisms from people that don't really understand the importance of the constitutional right to counsel.
Very briefly, are you surprised it's become a campaign issue for some? Well, some on the left and some on the right.
Well, I think most of the criticism on that particular topic is coming from Abrahamson's supporters. I think that they're trying to make a big deal out of that. I have not heard that criticism from many conservatives, frankly.
Even though she has not made it an issue personally.
I don't think she's done it personally at all, but people that tend to support her through various forums and articles that I've read tend to raise that much more frequently than the conservatives who are supporting me. It hasn't been a problem with the conservatives that I've been talking to.
Judge Randy Koschnick, we appreciate your time. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And next week on Up Front,